Okay, I have about 2 after the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get started at this point. I want to thank everybody that is online right here at this juncture. Please mute your audio unless you have a speaking part. We'll unmute it later on when there's a chance to ask questions or have discussion. And so without any further ado, I want to welcome you, and then I want to pass it over to our president, Adnan Akyüz. So take it away, Adnan.
Yeah, good morning or good noon and maybe good afternoon, depending on where you are. And I am in Colorado, Estes Park, actually, sitting on the same table as Nancy, and we are pretending to be strangers to each other, looking at each other's computers. I hope your view is as good as ours. I'm going to keep this short. I want to make sure that each committee is going to pitch in their initiatives. You're going to hear from the executive director, and I want to make sure that each of these individuals have enough time. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adnan. And as you can see from our agenda, we've got quite a few interesting things to discuss today, so I'm going to dive right into it. First off, if you're going to the Flamingo, which is where we are holding our annual meeting this year, I just wanted to throw in an overview slide here. You can see the schedule, registration, and icebreaker. We're looking to get that started 5 to 6-ish on Pacific time. That should be a great opportunity. I encourage you to show up. We'll have heavy hors d'oeuvres and a few things like that. There will be a chance to pick up your registration packet, and then we'll start about 8 o'clock the next morning. That will be Tuesday with the meeting, the awards luncheon, bowling. We are looking for a POC for that, so stay tuned to do that, and then we'll offer some other options for people that don't want to do the bowling. And then on the 26th, which is Wednesday, we'll have annual meeting continued, and then that is the time that we'll have our big banquet. And then we'll finally finish up on Thursday. Formal sessions are going to end midday, and then for those that want to, there's a great opportunity. We are in the heart of wine country in Northern California, and so Nina has arranged for us a climate and biodynamic vineyard tour and a wine tasting. We've put a deadline on giving interest, but if you really want in on that, I would encourage you to just send me an email. We do have spots available. So that's all I'm going to say about that right now, and then I'm going to go straight to your need to know information. Please reserve your lodging by the 23rd of May. We have a great discount with the Flamingo, and they're holding a room block for us. There's still space in the room block, but they will release those rooms on the 23rd of May. What does that mean? That means that if it's the 25th of May, you may not be able to get the rate if they rent the rooms to someone else out of our block. So I would encourage you to do that if you have not already. Registration for the annual meeting, we're in regular pricing levels. However, those do go up 15th of June. So if you've not already registered, I'd encourage you to do so. Go to the URL that I'm showing right there. It's the AASC website, stateclimate.org/meetings. That also has a lot of details. If you're flying into Oakland or San Francisco or whatever you're doing, there are shuttles available, and there's links that you can hit on there to make arrangements for a shuttle if you choose to travel that direction. There's also some other good to know information there. So if you haven't been on there recently, I'd encourage you to do so. It's my aspiration to have the pretty close to final looking agenda up on that website before the week's out. Also, if you've not paid dues, you should have received an invoice unless you're an associate that's part of an institutional membership. Please pay your dues by the 1st of June. We use those to compute quorums for our business meetings and voting and things like that. And it's really nice if you do it by then, because that gives me a few weeks to make sure all the numbers look good and everything's official. And then finally, I'd encourage you, if you've not already, please contact Nancy Sellover or email me. Nominate a new member. Part of what I've been doing is scrubbing through the membership dues or membership listings, and we've had a number of people retire or transition to other things. And I know that they didn't all just disappear. So you might have some colleagues out there that you've just not nominated for membership. So I would encourage you to do that. If you're an associate member, the nominations have to come from a full member. So you can either get in touch with somebody or send it to me, and I'll make the connection there. So that's all I'm going to say on that. There will be more in the newsletter, which you should see tomorrow. And for everybody that's able to make it, I'm really excited for you and looking forward to meet you guys out there. Part of the thing about us having this webinar today is this gives us an opportunity for those that can't make it for conflicts or budgetary reasons to kind of see what we're going to talk about as part of the meeting, and particularly part of the business meeting. And so that's why we're having a lot of this webinar today. So with no further ado, I'm going to transition into the Mesonet Committee meeting, and you can see it's a pretty extensive group there. Stu Foster is going to talk about some of the great work that the committee's been doing over the last year and really 2 years to put together a set of guiding documents that will form the basis for best practices and guidelines for those that either have a Mesonet or they're hoping to have one in the future. So I'm going to give it to Stu at this point.
All right, thanks, Glenn. I appreciate the introduction and want to emphasize that I'm representing a large group of very dedicated folks that have put a lot of time and energy into the AASC Mesonet Committee on behalf of the association at large. So you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so the committee structure, again, we've got a steering committee. You saw some of the names on there, and then we've got 4 subcommittees: functional standards and practices, meteorological data and metadata, marketing and sustainability, and data aggregation and regional services. And I wanted to highlight that because the work that I'm presenting and updating you on is largely the work of those first 2 subcommittees. So just make note of that. And then Glenn, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so we held a workshop in earlier this year in Nashville, February 27th and 28th. Glenn did a great job of helping to get that organized, and I know we talked in the past about various meetings associated with different places, and referred to them as like the St. Louis Accord or this Accord. But I thought with Nashville, to put a pun, it should be the Nashville Cord, you know. But in any case, I refrained from putting that in text on the slide. So we had 27 folks that registered for that workshop. That included, I think it was 3 people that joined us online. So those numbers are about right there. A pretty good turnout. We had a lot of folks there, and that meant a lot of voices, a lot of perspective, and opportunity to participate, but yet not too big that it got overly cumbersome. So we had an agenda that spread over 2 days. We started after lunch on the 27th, and we're scheduled to wrap up for people that had to leave early. We're trying to wrap up by 1 o'clock on the 28th, but we kept time open till 3 for those that had the opportunity to stay and continue to work. And one thing I wanted to highlight before looking there at the agenda was just again, the incredible dedication of folks there. So we had people after the first evening, instead of just going back to their rooms, we had dinner together, and then a number of people on subcommittees got together and after dinner, in some cases worked up until midnight before calling it quits, and then came back the next morning bright and early. We worked again through lunch until lunch, and then many people were able to come back and spend up until 3 o'clock or more. I had to depart at that point, but understood that there were some people who had later flights that again continued to work into the evening on the 28th. So tremendous amount of effort there on that workshop. Well, basically, in terms of the agenda, we had started out with presentation of draft reports from the Functional Standards and Practices Subcommittee. They had done a good bit of work in advance of the meeting, as had the Meteorological Data and Metadata Subcommittee. Both had been working in terms of collecting data through surveying members and piecing together data and so they had some work done to present to us, and that represented a starting point then really for the work that we did at the workshop. And then the other two subcommittees, sustainability and marketing and the data aggregation and regional climate services subcommittees, they gave status updates on what had been done up to this point, and then kind of outlining on what the next steps were. Just logically in the sequence of things, the work of those groups, there's some work that they can do now, but they also depend a bit on what comes out of the other two subcommittees. So really the focus was much more on those first two subcommittees. And then after that, we'd had presentations, had a number of sessions for discussion, to get group feedback, identify unresolved issues based on the draft reports that were presented, and then opportunities as a community to make revisions at that point. And so that was a productive process, but we also realized that there's a whole lot more work to be done than what we could do at the meeting or at the workshop. So a key thing here was that the workshop really jump-started a lot of activity that has remained very productive afterwards. Go to the next slide, please. So as we were in Nashville, one critical thing that came up is that we kind of shifted our focus. Again, you saw the Functional Standards and Practices Subcommittee that was working on drafting standards with the idea that these would be requirements for networks. And we really kind of quickly saw that the momentum was shifting to what we thought was a more pragmatic approach, and that was to focus on not standards at this point, but a document that summarizes current practices and then provides recommendations for what Mesonets should be doing. And again, the basis for that, I think, was just the recognition that there are a lot of different networks out there. They all started bottom up, and so it's you know, a case where we've got to understand and accommodate a tremendous amount of diversity. And so the idea was not to try to impose a set of rigid standards, but to identify and accommodate a range of practices while trying to kind of steer and move people toward greater commonality in what they're doing, with the idea that if we're successful in doing that, at some point in the future, we may be better positioned to, again, maybe be a little more narrowly focused in terms of standards and such. But we didn't feel that was the key direction at this point. So as a result, we ended up with a document that has evolved into including 5 major sections to it, and those are identified there. Siting stations and positioning instrumentation on those station platforms, looking at sensor performance, sampling rates, reporting rates, the maintenance of networks of stations, instrumentation, dealing with the quality assurance and quality control programs that Mesonets implement, and then talking a little bit about data processing and reliability of networks, and again, in the context somewhat of the National Mesonet Program. So I'll talk as we go forward, kind of summarizing some of the things that are coming out of that work. And before doing that, just point out that while the workshop was just those 2 days in February, the 2 subcommittees here on the functional standards and metadata have been holding regular Monday and Wednesday morning conference calls, working sessions, to do more online editing of documents. So that's been happening for, I guess I don't have the date we started, but basically 2 months, I'll say, a very regular participation with a minimum probably about 4 people and up to 6 to 8 people online. And again, a lot of dedicated people getting a lot of work done. Next slide. So in terms of citing, and again, I'm just try to hit some of the high points here and you'll be getting a document later once the draft gets cleaned up. We talked about station siting and started out with the focus on the actual physical site of the station and the things that should be proximate to, and recognize that there are some pretty rigid guidelines out there in terms of trying to find sites that are flat, open, grassy areas away from trees and buildings, and that's great where we can do that, but really recognize that mesonets operate at the mesoscale, not the synoptic scale, and so a mission of mesonets is to monitor weather and climate within those mesoscale environments, and so we need stations that have quality exposures, but they need to be representative of the mesoscale. And so we have networks that deal with locations that are very flat and open plains. We have areas that are much more rugged, mountainous, and diverse topography. We have coastal areas. We have networks that are in areas that have a high degree of urbanization. And the challenge is to monitor those types of environments. And so we had some comments on siting that emphasized the importance of networks following good practices, but also documenting as appropriate their siting strategy so they can better be understood by users. And then went into instrumentation, talking about recommendations on the heights at which sensors should be positioned, for example, and whether they should have shielding and so forth, proximity to obstructions around the station and such. Most of this was adopting existing standards out there that are mentioned by WMO or the initial draft document from the AASC several years ago, or the ASABI document for agricultural meteorologists and engineers. And then a good bit of work talking about metadata elements, the importance of documenting station locations, and not just the identification, but as you see that list of under station accounting and site exposure, details about the coordinate systems down to the vegetation types, land use, land cover, photographic documentation, really stressing the emphasis of collecting data about the stations and the station environments. So we'll go to the next slide. So here's just an example of some of the metadata elements, and again, we have a number of tables in the document. You can see, for example, vegetation type would be one metadata element, and networks would be asked to identify the dominant vegetation types within the footprint of the station. Is it mowed Bermuda grass, agricultural fields, native grasses, whatever the case might be, but to be able to document that. And likewise with land use and land cover, if you look down a roughness classification, identifying non-ambient signal sources. Are there buildings or roads nearby that could affect temperature measurements or moisture, atmospheric moisture due to irrigation, or even underground infrastructure that could impact soil monitoring, whether there are drainage tiles installed, that sort of thing. So trying to collect all of that type of information and provide a structure for doing so. Next slide, please. Went on to talk about sensor performance, sampling rate, reporting rate, and again, I just pulled a table from the document. There's a lot of numbers that you can study there. And again, I don't think we recreated or reinvented the wheel here. We were basically identifying and taking from other documents, a little tweaking if we felt necessary to represent the context of mesonets that are out there. One thing that I would highlight here is really focused for the most part on a 3-second recommended sampling rate and a 5-minute reporting rate for most variables, with the exception of some things that maybe do not vary on a shorter time scale. And then highlighted some common sensor types. We didn't go to the extent of telling networks what type of sensor they had to use, but identified some that are commonly used, and if If we felt that there was a range that were acceptable, we highlighted that. So again, we're trying to encompass the diversity of networks out there, with the idea that if in the future there's a desire to kind of move toward greater commonality, that can happen when the time is right. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay, additional metadata elements, and again, this is just a sampling of things. You can see, for example, I put in for air temperature, there's an element for the sensor model, for the installation date. So what model do you use? An example of particular instruments. When was it installed on the second row? The third row, how is the sensor housed? For example, temperature, is it naturally ventilated radiation shield, or do you have an aspirated radiation shield? And then the data averaging and processing procedure, common one out there, again, that's a sample every 3 seconds, average it into a 5-minute average for the temperature, and that becomes the observation. Similar kind of thing for wind sensor model installation date, averaging. In this case, I put wind in here because we highlighted that's a variable where you do a 5-minute average of 3-second samples for the average wind speed, but also identify the greatest 3-second sample as the peak gust. And so trying to make some recommendations to move people toward more commonality in terms of how they document, for example, wind gusts there. And then likewise, discussion about precipitation gauges, types of models, tipping bucket, weighing bucket, when it's installed, whether it has a shielding around it, and such. So that same type of information for other instruments is included in the document. Next slide, please. And then an overview of station maintenance, a little bit more qualitative in this section, but just providing recommendations in terms of having a regular schedule for going out and maintaining sites, including dealing with vegetation, sensor rotations, servicing precipitation gauges, so forth, how to do field functionality tests, in-field calibration, so forth, collecting photographs. These should be done at least once per year. We didn't say anything more specific because, again, recognize that different networks and different types of environments may have very different needs in terms of how frequently maintenance needs to be done. So really sort of a minimum standard there. And then also addressing how unscheduled maintenance would be dealt with. Next slide, please. And then again, some metadata elements for documenting general maintenance procedures. Describe what you do as part of a regular visit, and examples might be you replace sensor bearings if need be, trim the grass, level, clean instruments, and then identifying the frequency. We do this once a year, we do it every 3 months, whatever, but documenting that so that everyone can kind of have some transparency in terms of how your network operates in terms of its maintenance. And then likewise, some detail about specific maintenance visits. When did you do it? What kind of work did you do? Who did the work? And documenting all of that. Next slide, please. And then moving on to quality assurance and quality control. It's just an overview. Indicated that best practices included automated quality control. That would include tests relating to the physical limits of the parameter or variable you're measuring, seasonal fitness tests, what are plausible range of values for a given season of the year in that area, sensor intercomparison tests, temporal consistency tests in terms of looking at rates of change, and then spatial coherency tests if you look at one site versus the next and the magnitude of differences. So a variety of types of tests that should be implemented, but no more specific detail suggesting that everybody should be doing things exactly the same way beyond our scope. And then identification of the types of flagging that should be used, and again, based on accepted practices of what seems to be a good system that we recommended for networks. Next slide, please. Again, looking at metadata elements and highlighting some things there, the ability to perform quality control tests and to flag erroneous data when there's a suspicion of a sensor problem is a critical thing we recommend a network should be able to do. There should also be a manual process for quality control so you can review the output results of the automated processes. Should be a well-defined flagging structure implemented, and well-documented metadata for how quality control, both automated and manual, is implemented and what the outcomes of that are. And again, there's some examples of metadata elements that could be included there in terms of what the tests are and what the outputs are in terms of the types of flags that are used and such. And then likewise, metadata for calibration procedures. You know, what do you do in terms of calibrating different instruments? So an example there, return the temperature relative humidity sensor to manufacturer for recalibration, or if it's done in-house, how's that done in-house? How frequently do you do calibrations and calibration checks? Is it every 2 years, 3 years? Never do them, but just documenting that so that we know. Next slide, please. Okay, and then kind of moving toward the end here, data processing and reliability. Again, not a lot of quantitative detail here in terms of guidance, but recognition that the National Mesonet program is an important driver. They use a 95% reliability threshold for networks, and so we kind of use that as a minimum recommendation. There was some discussion that we should set the bar higher because most networks could do that, but again, we were really looking at trying to find a minimum level of commonality at this point, and there was no particular motivation to go beyond that level. Again, recognized that specifically that the 5-minute observation, typically packaged from 3-second samples and calculated in the data logger normally, treat that going forward as the core observation, and then recommended that any aggregate statistics, if we calculate hourly values, daily values, whatever, would be built from those original 5-minute observations. Otherwise, in terms of looking at data processing, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel at this point, just acknowledge guidance from NCEI regarding how to calculate aggregate values in the presence of missing observations. As we got in and discussed this, we recognized that this is a topic that needs more attention and perhaps should be a future focus of the AASC because it's extremely complex, and it would be very difficult to develop very precise, simple guidelines that would accommodate all types of situations. And then finally, we chose at this point not to address the definition of how aggregate variables are calculated. And the main consideration there was calculating for example, the daily average temperature, traditionally done as the climatologically as the average of the max and min temperature. But most networks or mesonets in general have data every 5 minutes. So you know, there are multiple ways, as we know, to calculate an average temperature. Recognized as an important problem, but decided that's a little bit beyond our scope, and we didn't want to get bogged down in it. So we'll go to the next slide. So that kind of summarizes the activities that happened in Nashville and then have followed up in the months since. So where we are now, we have a document that has gone back to the subcommittee chairs for completion of final edits. And it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 pages or so. We're looking to have a final draft available. We want to be able to distribute that draft to a select group initially, kind of internally, for initial review and suggested edits before we send it out there to the larger membership. And certainly the intent is to do that in advance of the upcoming annual meeting, with enough time for people to be able to sit down and digest that a little bit, and then I think we've got some time on the agenda at the meeting to discuss this before hoping to bring it to a vote in the business meeting. And with that, Glenn, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Stu. Before we move on, I'm going to just pause for a second in case anybody has any comments or questions. We'll just do that briefly at this juncture for Stu. As you can see, this is a work in progress, a lot of moving parts, a lot of people working on it, but we'll pause real quick. Anybody? Okay, nothing heard. We're going to just press right on. Oh, no, go right ahead.
Yeah, this is Bryant at NCI Asheville. I just want to ask Stu if at this meeting there was any input from NCI about everything that you've presented here.
Not really at this meeting. I know there were some conversations with some of our members in NCEI before in relation to possible commonalities with the CoOp program, and kind of recognize incorporating these observations into the data record. So we talked about that, but just felt again, one thing I've mentioned several times was that we kind of punted on some things because we didn't want to get too much complexity and get bogged down. And that was an area where we decided we just didn't want to get too bogged down yet. But I think it would be very appropriate. And I would suggest that if you or other folks there at NCEI, if you'd like to identify a person or two that you would like to read this initial draft here before we make it public, I think we'd be very happy to accommodate that.
Okay, because I have two suggestions. Jay Larimore, who's my section chief here at the dataset section, as well as my colleague Matt Minet, who works with the GHCN daily dataset and works with the QC of data. So what I can do is I can send you an email with those two contacts as suggestions for any reviews.
Okay, that would be excellent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Brian. Anybody else real quick? Okay, then we were going to press on. And next up we have not Laura Edwards. We've got Melissa Griffin. Laura's unable to make it, so Melissa's stepping in as a member of the membership committee to talk about some of the work they've done over the last year with respect to grievance process, and they also have a suggested language to amend the AASC Constitution. So please take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. What I'm going to be presenting in the next 4 slides is going to be a lot of text. So one of the things that we're going to do is Glenn will be sending out a PDF copy of the language for everyone to review, but we just want to present it briefly to you here so that we can have everyone look at it 30 days before the meeting, make suggestions so that way we can move to vote for this particular document. Just a reminder that the language that's being presented is a constitutional change, which means that full membership will vote on it, not the entire association. However, the membership committee is made up of full and associate members. We worked with the EC to come up with the language that's being presented on the slides today. So we're going to be adding a membership grievance portion to the Constitution, and this was brought up at the meeting in Nebraska last year. This is going to help with some of the concerns that were made about bringing in corporate membership, and then also having members that hadn't paid dues or were no longer active but still reaping benefits of being part of the organization. So on the first slide, you'll see that membership issues are going to be handled on a case-by-case basis with the executive committee, and they can also bring the membership committee into that. There are going to be a couple of different reasons or a couple of different ways that a dismissal from the organization can occur. The first one is going to be a failure of payment of dues. So this goes along with being able to the invoicing that we've made changes with and getting the dues, the membership dues, following up with that. So this is going to keep people, if they want to continue to participate and be a part of the organization, you know, by paying those dues when they're invoiced. Go ahead to the next slide, Glenn. So members will receive the notice that they have outstanding dues. If they do not pay within that calendar year period, they will immediately have their membership rights revoked, which means voting rights, the ability to access any of the AASC resources, including the listserv. If that member wants to become a part of the organization again, they're going to have to undergo the same process that we've outlined in the membership constitution and bylaws. Next slide. So this will be the voting process. They will have to pay the backed dues. So this is one of the ways to help keep a steady flow of the dues coming into the membership, but also help, hopefully, since we have these guidelines established, get more participation from our membership too. One of the other grievances that was brought forward was, if we're bringing in different people, we're bringing in corporations, what happens if that corporation no longer follows the same mission of AASC? So the executive committee and the membership committee work together to come up with language that not only applies to a particular corporate entity, but also to the membership at large. And this is going to talk about, if any member of the organization, corporate or full or associate, is found guilty of misconduct, then they are removed from the organization. They forfeit their dues, so they're not going to get a refund on their dues paid. And then we also have a couple of other pieces of language in there about a grievance to have membership revoked from a member can't be based on their personal or political opinions and views. So that was something that was stressed back and forth, working with different members of the association to also include in that particular document. Next slide. So I think any claim that's going to be brought forward for any type of membership grievance is going to be investigated by the EC. The EC will have 90 days to look into the membership grievance, or 3 regularly scheduled EC meetings, so that there's some time to actually put together some information. And if the claim is founded, the grievance is founded, then the EC will take appropriate action at that time. So again, it's a lot of words, and this is why we're going to be sending out a copy of the narrative for everyone to look at this time, after we're finished with the webinar. And then that will allow people the 30 days to review, provide suggestions, comments to the EC and the membership committee that we can use to address those as we go into the business meeting at the annual meeting. And with that, I'm done speaking for now.
Okay, thanks so much, Melissa. Does anybody have any questions on this one?
Hi, this is John. Seems like there's a little bit of wordsmithing that could be done before it gets sent out. If you want to send me a copy, I'll give you a quick turnaround on it.
Absolutely, that would be great. And so for everybody, part of the idea about presenting this to people is that you have a chance to look at it, poke at it, and say, did you really mean what you said that you wrote right here? Because while it was done as part of a committee process between the executive committee and the membership committee, we're not perfect, and we could think that this makes perfect sense, and then you guys get a look at it and kind of go, what the heck do you mean by this? So, and unfortunately, just during the course of a business meeting, where we look at it one day and we vote on it that afternoon or the next day, that's just not sufficient time. So I do encourage you, when this goes out, and this part should go out to you today via listserv, please take a look at it. And if you have any comments, I would encourage you to address it either to Laura or Melissa, or you can send it to me, and I'll make sure that everybody that's been part of this process gets a chance to look at it and respond. And if we have something and do make a change, we'll definitely provide you the update so you can see it before the meeting begins. And again, the point with a lot of this is if you've got some egregious things, for example, you've got a corporation that has a Deepwater Horizon moment, let's say, or whatever, and they happen to be a member, it may behoove us to not be associated with that group, or, heaven forbid, something else happen on a personal level that is misconduct that would rise to the level that the association may not want that linkage. And I think that was the impetus behind this whole initiative. So if you have any further questions, I'd encourage you to just go ahead and please contact me, or feel free to contact Laura Edwards or Melissa Griffin. And so with that, I think we're going to move on in the interest of time, unless anybody has a burning thing they want to say right now. There'll be a chance at the very end too. Okay. Nothing heard. We're going to press on, and this is going to be a great presentation from Mike Anderson of the ARSCO committee. There's been a lot of really great work going on there. We've had a few little snippets in the newsletter about what's happening, but I'll just let him talk about it. You can see the members of the ARSCO committee on this slide, and with no further ado, please take it away, Mike.
All right. Hi, everybody. Good to talk to you. So we've been active on the ARSCO committee as we continue to work on the idea of how to better support state climate offices to help improve their capacity, and then to review ARSCO status in a way that is enabling states to maintain the level of performance that is beneficial to the organization and our outreach with the broader community in terms of the value of state climate offices. So next slide. So again, the value, looking at a desired level of performance, where we can talk about capabilities of state climate offices and how they can contribute to the well-being of the states that we serve. Want as many offices as possible, sustaining that high level, having a designation of that high level performance with the ARSCO, and the opportunity to leverage their experience and activities to help other offices achieve that level. But one of the things we need to do is make sure that we don't have a time period where we lose performance, which then lessens the value of having that designation. So if we go to the next slide.
Is that the next slide? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was the slide you were after. Sorry about that. This one?
There we go. So yeah, there we are. So I want to keep the annual reporting going. Like the idea one, it lets us tell stories about what the great work that our offices are doing. We can use that to communicate the value of what we do. As we improve on the communication of the value of what we do, it generates motivation for what we could do should resources be made available to us. Had an Senate staffer, U.S. Senate staffer, who had contacted me about wanting some information, and really liked the state climate offices and recognized that they were an unfunded activity, but wanted, didn't have a good handle on how to tell a value story that might motivate investment. And so we said, well, we were going to work on that as an organization to try and improve that. And they liked that idea. So hopefully we can keep moving that direction. What we wanted to do with the periodic program reviews is ensure that sustained performance, but also, again, articulate the value of SCOs for potential future funding. And we want to motivate the development of materials to help develop SCOs, and we can share kind of best practices as a community and really foster AASC as a community of practice for our activities without having to create a box that we all have to fit, one size fits all situation. I want to avoid that. So if we go on to our next slide. So what we did as a committee, that we wanted to figure out how to do this program review. And we thought, well, if we do 10 offices per year, that's roughly a 5-year cycle. And we'd have 6 elements that we'd want to have the State Climate Office speak to. One, what are the areas of expertise that they provide and are serving as a resource for the state? What are the resources and lines of support? As with all unfunded activities, we have to generate funding somewhere to enable our activities to happen. So what are those lines of support, and how can we pull that in to help tell the story of what we have to do to gain resources to be able to provide the value of that areas of expertise. The next piece we have, which was a really interesting conversation, was an office plan. And conversation was around, well, we've never really talked about this. So, well, this is kind of an interesting idea, maybe to foster conversation with the group to think about. An office plan gives state climate offices the opportunity to think about where they'd like to go as an office, and a high-performing office has an idea of where they want to go and maybe some ideas on how they want to do it. This also might serve as a vehicle to provide ideas to other offices on what they might be able to pursue if they have a similar situation. Then look at the engagement. What does the State Climate Office do to engage its constituency? Next one, what is your constituency? Each state has its own kind of special needs for the State Climate Office and being able to articulate those. And then finally, collaboration. Again, as unfunded entities, it's hard to seek funding just to do one level of thing. Collaboration kind of enables that ability to reach a little further. So be able to talk about that and talk about the other good people that we get to work with. And then the really challenging part was coming up with a scoring system, a way of what constitutes good enough, and we can articulate in a high level of performance. That's where we're still working on right now, is trying to get that fine-tuned and to kind of work through this and see how it went. We used California as a test case, so I prepared a report along these lines and submitted it to the committee, and they evaluated it and provided feedback, and from that kind of gave us some ideas on what we want to refine in terms of the guidelines we put out for the community as to prepare this kind of review in ways that generate the valuable information back to the organization. So we're still working on it, work in progress, but this is the direction that we're headed. And I think that was it.
Yes, it was. Well, thanks a lot, Mike. And I'll just come in at the end of this and foot stomp a couple of things. You'll recall from the last several conversations we've had, probably over the last 2 years at the annual meeting, we've discussed whether there's value in ARSCO. And across the board, people have said, yes, there is value in having this designation from an independent body for a state climate office. And so what this piece does is it helps ensure continued integrity behind the ARSCO designation. And it also, along the way, helps us build that community of practice that Mike's talking about. They've been doing some really good work, and he was a very brave guy to say, I'm going to be the guinea pig. So that being said, if you've got any questions about this, I believe what we're hoping to do before the annual meeting is just let you look at one of the documents that that a state climate office would look at as part of a review process, so you can kind of see how this is going to look. Is that right, Mike?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, perfect.
To kind of share and certainly share my input, and I think I'd also like try and hopefully by the meeting be able to compile the responses of the committee in kind of reviewing what I presented, for California, and go ahead and share with the community how that looks. So we can make sure that, again, this is not supposed to be a taskmaster or stick over your head moment, but an opportunity for the organization to gather information, share, and help raise everybody's ability to perform their duties.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or comments about this? Okay. One last couple of things I'll say about it. We're a little bit behind our original optimistic estimate, and the reason is because the committee's been very deliberate in trying to find a good review process that fits this that fits the goals in light of the fact that all of the state climate offices are different to some degree. And then the backside, and I think that they're not struggling, but they're just trying to be very deliberate in finding a nice objective way to gauge the inputs following this. And so I think that once you see the work that they've been done, you'll see the value in it as we move forward. So that being said, I am going to take us to, I think, the last slide. We're doing pretty decent on time. This is closing discussion. Adnan, do you want to come back on if you're here and make any closing comments? This would be a good time for you to do it.
Yeah, let me unmute myself and talk. Yeah.
Okay,
I think that webinar is very beneficial, and I hope you all find it as beneficial as I did. Now I am going to be going to AASC annual meeting, which informed of all these initiatives that I am going to be voting on. And I think it is going to make our annual meeting, business meeting, is going to be more efficient. And you will be voting with the information that was provided to you a month before, and then you'll be coming there with better idea. I will see you all in Santa Rosa. It's going to be a very nice meeting, and I know that I've been attending the annual meeting organizing committee. They've been working very hard so that it is one of the best meeting ever organized. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Glenn.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm just throwing this one up really quick. Here are the dates once again. You want to do the wine tour, please let me know. And here's the other important dates. The real big foot stomper is to reserve that lodging because the 23rd is fast approaching. I believe it's next week. And if you've not registered already, please do so. I just got a room listing, and we've got some lodging people that have registered or that haven't registered for the meeting, and we've got some registrars that don't have any lodging. So I'll probably reach out to you just to make sure that that's going okay. Other than that, pay dues, and I'm going to be putting a recording of this online. It'll be at the AASC YouTube channel for everybody that if you want to listen to something again, and I'll also send that out tomorrow. So I think we came in under an hour. Thank you guys all for your attention. If you have any questions, comments following this, feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email or give me a holler. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you.